They're now feeling better about themselves, you know. Their self-confidence is growing. No more boredom. Let's get these young folks involved in serving the neighborhood. And they're all from this church that Jordan has planted in the neighborhood, full of people from the neighborhood.
And they could start wearing the church colors.
Yes, they're wearing the church colors. So there's these lack of opportunities, situations he's been involved in the past. Why did his family come to this church? Simple question, right?
He'd already come there.
He'd already come in. But here's the thing. One of us had to go there first. One of us had to be coaching the basketball. One of us had to be stepping out of the walls of the church and going on mission to get to know those kids on the basketball team, to build those relationships. It took somebody. And if you're a church that's saying we need to be involved in the neighborhood, we want to be more involved outside the walls of our church, you're going to need somebody, a champion, someone to get the ball rolling. Maybe someone who's innovative, an entrepreneur. There's so many, we call them apostles in our churches today, that are sitting there, and the churches are challenging them because they're not challenging with the opportunity to go out and be entrepreneurial and innovative in the neighborhood. So somebody had to go out there and then build a team, asking these mothers or these older ladies, can you be in the nursery? Can you teach cooking classes? We had men actually kind of guards at the door. But you needed someone to get the ball rolling. Someone to be out where they are. What Elaine was talking about and what we're doing more and more is we're sending communities out there. Various people. So in Jordan's case, we're like, okay, Jordan, you feel you want to start a church. We're going to resource you. We're going to equip you. But you're going to do it your way. It's kind of cool. It's like you're Christian, find other Christians and do church in your neighborhood. Don't go on the bus and go to people's church, which is 40 minutes away. You are the church. And so gather together as the church in Warden and then scheme up wonderful ways to bring the blessing of God into your own neighborhood. So we've got to be out there. But I think if you're from a church, more of an established traditional church, you've got to start thinking, how do we bring teams out there? How do we equip them? I love what she said about Celtic. I'm Irish, so the Celtic spirituality and how they planted churches is where the churches became these communities that would look into the neighborhood and see how we can bless the neighborhood. And then the neighborhood began to take it over. And then they were able probably to move on. The neighborhood owned it. And so that's what we have to do. So, I'm looking at the clock. When is this over?
I think supper's in 10 minutes.
Okay, so I'm just starting. That's my first point. So I'm going to show you one thing, and then I'm going to talk about more practical stuff. One of the ways, Randall, you can relate to this too. Randall does work in Hamilton in under-resourced neighborhoods as well. But one of the best illustrations I've ever heard from a book called Riches for the Poor. Forget the author. But he talks about how we need to allow people who are poor to see the arts, to go to the symphony. We took a bunch of mums from Warden to go to the ballet. It was hilarious. They were talking about the guys in the tights and just listening to them talk about it all. But it gets them out of their normal routine of the hood, of darkness, of hopelessness. And to be able to get them out there into a different world is so important. I remember taking a busload of kids to Oakville. Oakville's a kind of a rich area in sort of the GTA. And there was a private school that was putting a carnival together for our kids. And so we had a busload of kids. And as we drove into Oakville, the kids were scared. They're all black, and they're looking out the window, and all they see is white people, big houses. And they were looking out the window, and they were really scared. You should see their eyes. And they're like, whoa, look at all those white people. I'm like, hey, I'm white. They go, no, you're different. Look at all those white people. Look at the houses. And one of them said, we're not welcome here. I said to that kid, I said, you're welcome anywhere you go. But if you're just used to this little bubble of hopelessness, then, no wonder we have Marcuses and these problems. And so one of the things that this book talks about is get them out of the bubble. Because this is what happens in under-resourced neighborhoods. And this is what happens in First Nations reservations. Some of you may be working close to First Nations reservations. This is what happens. Is in the way back in the day, when First Nations folks lived in Canada before we came over and screwed everything up, they would hunt buffalo. And what they would do is they would come down, and they were smart because the buffalo would be in here, and what they would do is they'd form a surround. So you'd have a hunter here, a hunter there, a hunter here. Instead of all coming down from the mountains together, because if you all came down from the mountains together, where would the buffalo go?
They would just run the
They
other
just
way.
run the other way. So they got smart. So they said, hey, you go this way, I'll go this way, you go that way, you go that way, you go that way. And if the buffalo go this direction, you got them. If they go that direction, you got them. They're caught in a surround. And in this book, Riches for the Poor, it was saying that First Nations reservations, government housing neighborhoods, people feel like they're caught in a surround, that they can't get out. And they feel they're being hunted. And what would happen with these buffaloes, one of three things would happen with the buffalo. Some of the buffalo would fight back, fight the police, fight the sources. Some of them would fight back, and they would get killed. Others would in panic, fight each other. Gangs. They'd fight each other in panic, running into each other. And others would just give up and say, kill me. People in drug abuse. Teen girls getting pregnant, they just give up. And that's what happened with the buffalo. And this is what happens in the government housing. Now, one thing I've noticed in government housing is the hunters are very interesting. Some of them could be churches. I remember one time we had a church come in, Warden again, that's one of our housing neighborhoods. And this guy was on the CBC. It was the Summer of the Gun. I don't know if you remember that, Summer of the Gun. 2004, I think, was the Summer of the Gun in Toronto. And this guy was getting a big name as pastor, and he was on the CBC, and he was just one of these guys. And he's going to march into Warden. And what they would do is they'd march into communities with their Bibles, and they'd pray against demons, and they'd sing songs, and they'd wear army fatigues. And so the media loved this guy, right? And so I actually had somebody from the media interview me, and they said, this person, I won't mention his name, but this person's bringing his church into the neighborhood. What do you think about that? Now, I said something very non-Mennonite. And I said, this is off the record, I'm only joking. But if he comes in, oh yeah, the guy said this, he goes, I'm going in there, and if someone shoots me, well, that's fine, because I'm bringing in God, and we're going to fight these demons, and if someone shoots me, I'm ready to die, all this craziness, right? So she said, what do you think about him saying this and coming to the community? And I joked with her, I said, if he comes in here, I'll shoot him. I'm Irish, it's an Irish humor thing. And she looked at me, right? I said, that's off the record, I'm only kidding. But I said, do you realize what he's doing? He's a hunter. He's bringing his church in. He thinks he's helping, but the media's showing up, and what do the people in the neighborhood think? Oh, everybody thinks my kids are demonized. Everybody thinks that the whole media is in how bad my neighborhood is. It's stereotyping it even worse. And whenever we bring in missions groups, we've done this in the past. In fact, we did one just this past fall. We always tell them, don't take pictures. This isn't the zoo. Because you'd actually hear people go, oh man, I can't believe they live there. I can't believe this is happening, whatever. So sometimes Christians, they may mean well, but they can do a lot of damage. They can do a lot of damage. And usually what happens is they try it out for 4 weeks and then they leave. When things get hot, they're not incarnational, they're not staying there, and it hurts, it's bad. Especially for those of us who are there long term. Sometimes it's the police. I've seen the police come in. I've seen these officers come and they have a drug dealer, and the drug dealer pays them off. So, hey, we're not going to arrest you as long as you pay rent. Everybody in the neighborhood knows that. But it happens. They feel hunted. We've had the police come in and beat up people. I won't go into detail. So, again, I'm not knocking the police. Like, there's some really good, I have friends who are cops. They're embarrassed by the bad things. But they're still, now the neighborhood always thinks they're being hunted by the police. And if you want to look at urban culture, what do they think about the police? I mean, they don't like them at all. 5 minutes, I think. I remember one apartment building in Jane Finch where we were involved in, people would always drop bricks on the police cars. And so, when you're poor, I had a kid who's 13 years old, playing basketball. He got mad and he took the other kid's basketball and went to his apartment. The police came and took the kid away. I'm going to tell you something. If that kid was white and was living in Oakville, the police would have never done that. And now we got to deal with this. So anyway, they feel, again, put yourself in their shoes. This is now their perspective of life. No wonder they give up. Sometimes social workers are part of the hunters. I know a lot of social workers that are there because they get government grants. But when the government grant runs out, they just leave. As Christians, we don't leave, man. We stay. And so on and so forth. So a lot of people, the media could be hunters. They're always saying negative things about the neighborhood. And so what do we do about this? How do we, this is hopelessness. What do we do? Back to what Elaine's saying. We enter the surround. We become the church in the surround. For God so loved the world that he sent his son into the surround. Instead of moving out to the burbs, we need more churches to move into the urban centers. And here's the cool thing. There's a lot of good people already living where we can plant churches. Again, we call it unique expressions of church, whose focus is the neighborhood, not buildings, not safety for their own people, more about how do we bless our neighborhood. It's our neighborhood. And the exciting thing is, most of the people in our government housing, none of them have cars. So when you plant a unique expression of church, they can walk there, because they're not going anywhere else. And I talk about, so here's what we do. Here's the practical side of what we're doing in our ministry. I know this looks really confusing, but it's an incarnational approach to entering the surround. There's 4 C's. First C is community. Second is first one's communion. Second is commission. Third is coach. Fourth is community. I did 4 C's so you can remember it, right? Let me just start with community. When we create a unique expression of church, or a micro-church, or a missional community, we need to build this community. And it's a community that Victor Turner, sociologist, tells a story about. He came up with this crazy word called communitas. And what he was doing was he was studying African tribes and how they initiate young people. And I'm going to make this quick because everyone's finishing. And what he realized was when they put the soldier, the hunters would go into the village, they lived in separate quarters, they'd grab the 13-year-old kids, take them into the jungle, and leave them there for 6 weeks. Victor Turner's watching this, and he sees what's happening, and he sees that these young people, at first they kind of go their own way, but within a few hours they all gather together and form a community. And he said what happened in that 6 weeks with those kids was that they were so tight, they formed such a caring, loving community of support for one another because they had a mission, they had a purpose, they knew they could accomplish more together than by themselves. When you form a unique expression of church in one of these neighborhoods, you're a communitas. You have a purpose, a mission to bless the neighborhood, and it brings community. Like Elaine said it again, you don't argue over carpet and stuff like that. The second thing is we make sure that I said twice a month, but you can do this once a week, and Lord, they do it once a week. We have communion. I say normal church service. They may have hip-hop worship music. They may look a little bit different, but it's time of the Lord's Supper, a time of prayer, a time of teaching. Second thing they do is once a month. In their case, in Morton, it's every week. They're there to serve someone. If you have a unique expression of church in the neighborhood, maybe you only have time to put on a party, a community barbecue, something where you're serving that neighborhood or that people's group. The fourth thing is we coach. We train people. We mentor to keep this going. And I'll tell you something. When you look at the people we're dealing with, the hurting people we're dealing with, this is based on Acts chapter 2, by the way. What we find is that they get into these circles very easily. Because as she said, before you can believe, you got to belong. You got to see it. You got to feel it. And when you belong, you begin to believe, and it changes how you behave. I'm sorry, I wish I could. I wanted to go longer in this, but time has stopped me. But thank you, guys. I have to end. I wish I could go longer. But thank you. If anybody wants to talk some more, I just talk to you guys about it, encourage you, anything we can do to help out, that's what we're here for. So thank you for this time tonight.